very good afternoon to you all. I hope I find you well. It's actually good morning in some places, and it's good evening in others. This is an hour with Treasury. I'm Dama Sugu, joining you from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, representing the Treasury Department of the Zimbabwe West Union Conference. Once a month, we share Zook issues, updates, and insights, and we trust you will be blessed today. What would be nice really is to see where you are joining us from. In the comments, just greet us, greet everybody, and tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. We would be blessed by seeing you do that for us today. But before we get into today's program, I do have an announcement that I would like to share with you all. We will not be having an episode in the month of September, but you can join us on the 2nd of October, where we'll be talking about tech and treasury. We'll be having a conversation on how technology is enhancing and innovating our treasury functions and processes. We have a great team joining us then. We've got our Chief Information Officer from the Southern Africa Indian Ocean Division, Tembinkosi Moyo. He'll be joining us. We have our Sun Plus Director from the General Conference of SDAs. For those who don't know, the Sun Plus is the enterprise, the ERP, accounting software, for lack of a better word, that we use as the SDA Church throughout the world. And we also have the CFO of the Cape Conference, Russell Riley, in addition to Brent Burdick. So make a note, don't look for us in September, but look for us on the 2nd of October, where we look forward to a great conversation on the 2nd. Today, we have a very special guest. We have a great discussion today as we chat with Elder Paul Douglas, the incoming Chief Financial Officer of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. He has been exceedingly kind to join us for this wide-ranging discussion as he settles into his new responsibility. I will add him to the stream shortly. Elder Douglas, we are grateful to have you with us this afternoon. I know it's early for you. We say afternoon here, but it's morning for you where you are. Thank you for waking up for this appointment, and we know we have a few more coming. Welcome. Maybe just before we start, just to get a sense. Watching from S, you didn't tell us where S is. Bulawayo. Okay, they're coming. We're seeing the comments. We wanted to see if we also have some from further afield, but we really appreciate those who are greeting us early on in our program. Elder Douglas, let me just jump straight into it because we may not have enough time. So let me start now. Let's go back to the beginning so that we get a bit of context about you. If you can tell us where you were born, we don't want to make assumptions, where you attended school and how you came to choose the accounting profession. I think that would be a pretty good start for the discussion today.
Well, certainly. Thank you, Elder Masuka, for the invitation. It's truly my privilege to be here with you. It's evening or afternoon where you are. It's early morning where I am. But nevertheless, God is awake everywhere at all times. So it's Absolutely. Good to come and fellowship together, especially on the Sabbath, as we consider some of the questions that you will ask of me today. Now, the question of where I'm from, I was born in the beautiful island country of Jamaica. I was born in the beautiful island country of Jamaica, which would be in the Inter-American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. So I was born in Jamaica. I attended church school. The name of that school was Kingsway High School. So I did preparatory school and high school there. And then I went to one of our institutions in Jamaica. West Indies College was the name at the time. Now it's Northern Caribbean University. So I spent 2 years there at West Indies College and did my associate's degree in business administration. Then migrated to the United States in 1984 and started to attend La Sierra University. Then it was known as the La Sierra campus of Loma Linda University. So I completed my undergrad degree in accounting at the La Sierra University in California. But to get to accounting, I must share with you, was a little bit of a journey. Um, I'm a pastor's son, and in Jamaica, as a pastor's son, you are supposed to become a pastor. And in high school, I did the sciences to become a medical doctor. That was my intent, to become a medical doctor. But I recall very vividly one afternoon, my father came by the school and we were under a tree, and he asked of me a question. What are your plans? Now, I wasn't so sure how to answer that question, and I thought it was a trick question because here is my father, who is a pastor, asking of his son, what are your plans? Well, in my culture and in my country of Jamaica, parents tell you what you're going to do. It's not you have no choice. Well, back in those days, it's a little bit different now. Parents kind of tell you what your career path will be, and they will map it out for you. So to hear my father ask of me, what are your plans? And he being a pastor, that really was a baffling question. And he noticed that I hesitated to answer. And here's what he said to me: do not become a pastor because I am a pastor.
Hmm.
If the Lord leads you to become a pastor, then you do so. But do not become a pastor because I am a pastor. Now, that was a refreshing thing to hear from my father. Didn't expect that. And today I still am marveled by the fact that he would have extended that liberty to me to say, do not become a pastor, but choose what you believe the Lord has called you to do. So I went with relief now, going to the university, or West Indies College at the time, with the intent to continue the pathway of sciences to go to medical school. But when I arrived and was there to register, I had this deep sense of concern in my mind. I said to myself, well, medical school, that sounds like 8 more years of my life of study before I would then be available to be in the workplace. Medical school, that sounds like blood, and I'm not too sure I'm pretty much suited for the visual of blood. So I was now at a very unfortunate situation, having arrived at college and not now knowing what to do after my father has given me the liberty not to be a pastor because he's a pastor, been prepared in the sciences to do medical school, but not so sure now what to do. A family friend who was ahead of me by 3 or 4 years and had now, well, at least 5 years, that had now graduated and was teaching at the school and had done accounting, I spoke with him and mentioned my dilemma. And he said to me, listen, I teach bookkeeping. This is the most elementary course in accounting. I teach bookkeeping. Register for that class and let us talk after you've completed that class. I registered for that class. I got an A in bookkeeping, and the rest is history. I followed the pathway of accounting all the way through my life, even to a graduate degree in accounting. That was God's plan for me, to be an accountant. But the liberty that my father extended I appreciate every day because that was not common or something that you would expect from a pastor in Jamaica to tell his son, do not become a pastor because I'm a pastor. So that is my journey, Elder Masuko, to how I've arrived, born in Jamaica and in the field of accounting. And that's how that came about.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, oops, I think there's an echo. Um, can you hear me, or there's an
I
echo?
can hear you quite well, yes.
Okay. I was saying off the record, I will tell you something about what you've just said that resonates with my story, but we'll settle it out of court.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, but people seem to. Someone is saying it's a lesson for parents because most of the time we want to kind of weigh into
Mhm.
um, our children's career paths. So that was amazing, great stuff. Well, let me maybe then nicely move to the next question, because I came to be aware of your work when Elder Makosonke Moyo, he was our last CFO for our union before realigned. Well, before I joined, I think he invited you for an internal control seminar
Yes, I
many
remember.
years ago,
Mhm.
and you were with the General Conference Auditing Service at the time,
Correct.
leading that department. But prior to that, I wasn't really aware of your service. Now that we know how you started the accounting journey, and at the point when I first met you, can you kind of bridge the gap? What was your professional journey after you graduated?
Well, interestingly enough, I have been with the GCAS, as it's known, or General Conference Auditing Service, all of my professional life.
Wow. Okay.
So when I finished La Sierra University in 1986, my first employment was in the United States with the General Conference Auditing Service as one of their staff auditors in California. And I've gone through the ranks as being a staff auditor. I've managed a district. I went to the headquarters in 1997 and managed. I was an assistant director to Eric Korf at the time to deal with methodology and quality control. And after that, in 2000, I relocated to Florida when the General Conference asked me to move to Florida to administer the Inter America Division operations of GCAS. And in 2007, when Elder Korf retired, the GCAS board recommended my name to the General Conference Executive Committee to be elected as the next director for GCAS. So my professional life has been on the other side of the desk, as it
Right.
were, as the auditor. And August 4 of this year would have been 35 years that I was
Wow.
on that side of the desk. And then on
Wow.
August 1, August 4 of this year, then I now took up the role as treasurer of the General Conference. So my entire professional life, 35 years, has been with the General Conference in this
Oh,
financial arena.
fantastic.
This is for
Well,
someone.
certainly
This was for someone who started with bookkeeping.
for someone who wanted to become a doctor.
That's right. But the Lord
Yeah.
had a
Well, I
different.
mean, sorry, I missed that.
The Lord had a different plan.
Absolutely, at 100%. I mean, now, in fact, it's interesting when you say 35 years. 35 years means 35 years of being in GCAS and being in audit means you have 35 years of knowing all the dark corners of the church.
Mhm, mhm,
So it's not a bad time to transition. What I would say though is I'm aware that at the point where you then became you were at the helm of GCAS as a client, because I've been a client for a while now. or part of teams that have been GCAS clients, we've seen a transformation in the way GCAS has showed up in terms of the corporate identity, the corporate branding, the reports that we've started to see. And in recent years, it almost felt like for some of us who'd been audited by Big Four firms before joining the church, to a certain degree, it did feel like you were really bringing a certain level of professionalism to GCAS. Now, in your opinion, what would you say were the milestones that you look back and say, I think that was significant. That point was significant in that whole journey.
Well, thank you for appreciating the transformation or seeing the transformation, because it was an intentional activity on my part and my other leaders that were with me as part of GCAS leadership at the time. But I must give credit to the shoulders upon which I stood, Eric Korf before me and all the other directors before me. And I know the intent, especially in the year 2000, was to bring GCAS as a global brand, a global entity administered at the headquarters in the General Conference. Before that, every division had its own version of an audit program. So back then, you would have had the AID, African Indian Ocean Auditing Service, AID, which now has been broken up into SID and ECD, WAD, that whole reconfiguration. TED, Trans European Division Auditing Service. So each division had its own auditing service. So in 2000, those were all brought under one umbrella, now to be administered as a global entity. So in 2007, when I came into the directorship, I felt it was my place and the place of the team that I had together with me to really make that a true reality, that it's a global brand where excellence anywhere is also excellence everywhere. And as part of that, there were two key investments that were made, and investments in the competencies of our people to ensure that across the board there was a consistent level of competence, that an auditor in Zimbabwe is of the same excellence and competence level as an auditor in Australia, or one in Australia is the same competence as the one in the United States. That was an intentional area of investment to ensure those competences were consistent worldwide. But another investment that we made was to invest in communication. So, we can get technical, and you are familiar, you're an accountant yourself, Elder Masuku, so you can understand the technicalities of the information that an auditor would present. But when it gets to the governing boards and the persons who are then to make decisions, they are not as informed or appreciative of the technicality of the language that is used. So we made a very good effort, an intentional effort to transform how we communicated technical information, and not to dilute its substance, but to put it in such a way that it could be more appreciated and acted upon. So that investment in competences and investments in how we communicate, I believe, were the two significant milestones of what we've been able to accomplish. And that represented now a global brand of GCAS. And yes, your experience in comparison to a public accounting firm like Price Waterhouse or Ernst and Young, well, the way the church intended GCAS to be designed, that it would perform and operate substantially equivalent to that of an external firm. In fact, the only difference that could be found is that we are still part of the church. We have a different role, but we're still part of the church. But in terms of the standards, in terms of the approach, in terms of the expectations, they would be equal to what was being provided by an external firm.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and in all honesty, I know members of your team they're happy for the new responsibility, but certainly GCAS feels like they kind of lost out at the point where you were making that transition. I say this, we had a seminar not so long ago, and I think one of the some next steps that you were planning became apparent. So I hope the team will continue with the good work.
Yeah,
But now having
I have all
yeah,
confidence that whatever plans that were still on the table will still be pursued, because these
okay.
plans were not only of my own, but a collective thought process. And the new leader, Robin Kajur for GCAS, she's there and she's attuned to the pathway that we have mapped out for the future. So GCAS is in good hands.
Fantastic, and I did note the she, so I think we're doing well in terms of diversity and inclusion, as far as that's concerned. But having said that, you've become you've been elected to become the chief financial officer of the World Church at a time when the world is in flux. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Those of us in our part of the world, we're in our third wave of the COVID pandemic, which we've lost friends, colleagues. The world economy is a little unstable. The vaccine is kind of helping in some places for economies to open up. And in the context of the church, Zimbabwe, where I'm sitting, our union is a blocked currency, meaning what we collect here as tithes and offerings does not freely move as it used to before. Yes, there are certain benefits that we're beginning to get from the central bank, but it's still pretty tight. And then, boom, you become the CFO of the World Church. What are your thoughts in navigating this terrain, which seems to be a tough neighborhood, for lack of a better word?
Well, my first thoughts are to remain on my knees and pray
Yeah.
for strength and pray for wisdom. And I don't say that lightly. I say that with all sincerity of heart, because the challenges, they're great and they're numerous, but I'm confident that God is greater. And you mentioned a particular area of challenge in terms of blocked currencies. Yeah, Zimbabwe is not the only place. There are several other places around the world that are similarly creating difficulty in how we can move resources, as we retain that principle of sharing resources within our church, so we can move the gospel commission forward. But I think God will grant wisdom. I know this COVID-19 and the pandemic that has plagued our world, um, it's a wake up call. I
Mm,
don't think there is a going back to the way it used to be. We're going to have to adjust to this as almost as normal. And just
mm,
behind COVID-19 is the next pandemic, is the next crisis that's already in the making that we don't already yet know. So we need to be able to adjust our thinking and anticipate these types of crises and mobilize ourselves differently in terms of how we will continue to do God's work. God
mm,
will provide the resources to do his work. I'm
mm,
not afraid of that. God will do that. Interestingly enough, during this pandemic, we have seen faithfulness increase.
mm,
We have seen giving increase in many parts of the world when their economic conditions have worsened.
mm,
So we have to be thankful that this is God's church. This is not our church. This is God's church. We are merely instruments. And you and I have been placed in the role of financial stewards to mobilize God's resources to do his work. So we will leave that to him in terms of those challenges. He will provide the strength, he'll provide the wisdom for us to engage those challenges, overcome those challenges, so God's work can prosper and God's church will be triumphant.
just to confirm what you've just said, I mean, we had Elder Rodney Brady, CFO of the South Pacific Division a few months ago on the same program. And he had a graph that was showing us how giving actually bounced up at the height of the pandemic in Australia.
Mhm.
So I totally agree that this is God's work, and he will definitely make a way. Having said that, I mean, we when you have times like these, when there's crisis, the issue of transparency becomes such a big thing. I mean, we, I say we as a church, we really come under the spotlight, under the microscope to see if we're handling resources in the way that we should. As a church, what would you say for someone who really wants to know what is in place to ensure transparency in the SDA church, in our system, certainly with respect to treasury? What would you say we have done to ensure transparency at a time such as this?
Well, what we have done, and I believe there's a lot more to be done, um, is to first of all have an audit program, as we do have. Two, we also have the expectations for church organizations to provide their financial reports monthly, not ever so often, but monthly to their governing committees. And we also have an expectation that these governing committees will study these reports and will take the actions that are necessary based on what they are seeing. We also have constituency session where reports are being made. So I believe our reporting mechanism, the frequency of it, the completeness of expression of what is in those reports, and provided to the people of the church who are in governing roles, whether on an executive committee or on a board or at a constituency session. Those are some key elements that I believe support and provide the platform for transparency and accountability within our church. And the more that we engage with those persons who are on these committees, provide them information, and they do their fiduciary duty to understand that information, ask questions, and take appropriate actions, I believe the church will be well served.
And to your credit, Elder, I mean, you being with us on this platform, I mean, it's fair to say a generation ago, this may not have been a normal thing for you to actually kind of communicate directly with everybody the way you are. So I would say hats off as well for making yourself available for platforms such as this one. What I did want to say though is it's not lost on me, certainly not lost on others. I had a good friend of mine whose grandfather was a CFO of the GC, Marlon Butler. His grandfather, I think Lance Butler,
Mhm.
was a treasurer way back, and so that's my childhood. And I'm not certain that I've seen anyone of color um,
Mhm.
in office. We could argue, we could, I mean, we could debate about that in terms of who you've just replaced and so on. But certainly, I've not seen someone who looks like me, let me put it that way,
Okay.
sitting where you're sitting. What would you say about that? Is that significant? And to what extent will it assist in terms of bringing unity to the church, do you think, or it doesn't matter?
I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I believe the person who was just the previous CFO and treasurer of the General Conference couldn't be counted as a person of color as well. But nevertheless, I think the fact that at the General Conference that you see three officers that are broadly distributed and a reflection of the membership of the church is a good thing. It's a good thing. I know of the times of which you speak that the complexion at the top was homogeneous. But I
Correct.
think at this point in time, it is reflective of the membership of the church. You have Pastor Wilson, then you have Pastor Kohler, and you have myself. So I think that is a good thing because it is important when you're leading people that they can also see themselves in roles of leadership. And I think that allows for greater mobilization, greater inspiration, because they feel part of the whole. So, in that way, it's significant. I'm humbled by the appointment. I must tell you that I have been and remain humbled by the appointment. But if perchance the fact I come from a background that is similar to yours and it provides inspiration to you and others, God be praised. God be praised.
Mm, mm. Absolutely. Well, the one of the things that people talk about, I think George Knight wrote a book about this a while ago in terms of restructuring the church and so on. But the voices have become louder in recent times. People feeling or wondering if the church structure as it is, it reflects best practice, if it's ripe for restructuring, if especially now post COVID, wondering if we can continue to operate the way we have always operated, and whether there are benefits that can accrue from actually restructuring the way we operate as a church. Now, I'd be quite keen to know if what your thoughts are on that. Do you see opportunities for restructuring? Do you think we're still fit for purpose in the way we are operating? Are there benefits that can accrue from maybe revisiting the way we're currently configured as a church?
Yeah, my opinion on that is that even before COVID, it would be a rightful question to ask whether or not our structure is a best fit for the times of where we are today. And COVID obviously now injects another sense of urgency and another appetite to be asking those types of questions. But regardless of a pre COVID premise and a post COVID premise, we need to have those conversations carefully, because I believe God gifted this church to us. God gifted this structure to us. And we need to seek Him to provide the guidance as to what changes He would have us make, whether now or into the future. This is not a matter of human construct. This is a God given structure that He has placed in our hands to move His work forward. So there's nothing wrong with us to consider the question, pre COVID or post COVID, but that we need to remember that we do it in a way of diligence and seeking divine direction to ensure that we are in accordance to God's will for His church at this time. So that is my thought. I mean, I on a personal level might have my own thoughts of what could be changed or what could be modified or enhanced or done away with. But before that, and over and above my own thoughts, is God's will.
That's absolutely that's a perfect answer, because I think especially for those of us who do work for the church, there is this mistaken misconception where we end up wanting to take the bull by the horns and forget that this is a movement, it has an owner, it has a leader, and we are in positions of stewardship. So I appreciate that response. What I would want to ask you, though, still around COVID, I mean, what we've seen, look, this very program, in my view, pre-COVID in our part of the world, I would be sitting at my local church in the afternoon program, okay? Yeah. So this is a function of lockdowns and, you know, all kinds of things and platforms that were previously sort of backwater facilities. But now we've seen technology sort of jump up to the front line. What's your perception of where technology can take us as a church, or where we can take technology in mission going forward?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, COVID has taught us a lot. You know, the technologies that we're using right now existed before. but we
True.
would never have thought to use them because we would have been keeping our own patterns of behavior that would have been accustomed to. You, as you just said, you would still be at church, and I'd be getting ready for Sabbath school. But this has now opened up a whole avenue of connectivity and being able to share the gospel in a way that we had never really considered before. Now, there's a saying that necessity is the mother of invention. And
True.
because of necessity, we had to now leverage technology to continue keeping the fellowship together, continue keeping the commission that we have been called for going forward. So I see that this is a way of the future. And even further utilization of technology will come as we now take some time to think as to how can we better leverage technology so we can preach this gospel to every kindred tongue and every nation and into all the world so Jesus Christ can come. So it is unfortunate that we had COVID. It is unfortunate that many have suffered and many have died because of this pandemic. But I believe in this crisis, we have seen the wisdom to now utilize technologies to keep ourselves together as a family and keep the mission going forward.
Yes. Well, the just to change gears a little bit and kind of look at um, seek your advice on something. Treasury personnel, for the most part, are in place to support the operations of the church, be it at the local church level, conference, all the way up to the GC. We are essentially a support function. But it's fair to say, I mean, I've observed, be it at the local church, if you look at when I sit with treasurers at the local church, when I sit with my team at the office, we find that we are not always, we don't really gel too well with the people we are meant to support, oftentimes. And yet, that's one relationship that should really be optimized. What would you say to Treasury personnel who are kind of struggling with relationships with those they are actually mandated to support?
Well, I would first change the word support and make
Okay.
that word serve.
Serve. Okay.
And if we operate in a mind of service, and if we operate that together, we are about God's mission. It's not the fact that the president or the pastor or the secretariat, those persons are about God's mission. No, we all are part of God's mission. And we all have a seat at the table to discuss and to decide together as to what path we will take. Last week, when I was speaking to one of the division treasurers, I'll name him Marlon Lopes in the South American division, and he mentioned something to me that has stuck in my mind, that as treasurers, we should not be about managing the money. We should be about organizing the money so it can fulfill the mission. Managing the money is keeping it in the bank. Managing the money is to recording the debits and credits. Managing the money is to making sure your banks are reconciled. But organizing the money is the strategic approach in understanding why God has provided the resources and how they're to be used. Let us then serve as treasury personnel, but serve in a way to be organizing the money for God's mission.
Okay, I think that's a quotable quote. It's interesting how these are not new words. They're not difficult words, but they do change the mindset in many ways if they are ordered appropriately. Thanks for that contribution. Someone has just tweeted or posted that. Amen. Organizing the money.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll be hearing a lot more about that in the future. Now, having said that, I mean sorry, I do keep making reference to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. No problem. It is real.
Yeah, it's taught us that we don't always have to travel long distances for meetings. Mm-hmm. Look, what year? This is 2021. Last year, we were supposed to be at the GC, and I can assure you, there are many meetings that we would have attended at our regional office in Pretoria and countless others elsewhere that we have not attended, but have attended virtually, and the work continues to go on. And we've saved a lot of resources by utilizing some of these platforms that are available. As we speak, as a union, I think our last physical XCOM, I have to be reminded, it was, it could be 18 months ago plus. And that obviously translates into savings. What's your view? Because it's as if people are waiting for COVID to go away and then we start traveling again. Would you say we should, is this the direction to go? I mean, we've proved it can work. Can we say this is the new way of doing things? What are your thoughts on that?
Now, my thoughts are right along with what you're saying, that COVID has taught us that a lot of the travel that we did before could be completed by technological means. Okay. Now, Elder Wilson and I were joking the other day. I had not seen him for 15 months in person. 15 months.
Wow.
Yet still, we were relatively on Zoom or by other means very regularly. So we were not out of contact. But I had not seen him for 15 months. The last time I'd seen him at the time was annual council of 2019. So I say this to say that the technological means that are now available to us, that I believe God ordained in advance of the crisis, so we could have it available to us. We need to utilize it more. We need to utilize it more. We need to, before we just jump at the opportunity to fly again or to drive again, ask ourselves the question, is there a better use of the resources that we have provided? Can that be more organized towards the mission as opposed to paying for a flight to a location that could be done by Zoom? So we need to ask ourselves the question more often and more critically as we organize God's resources. Now, I will admit that there are some times that a meeting in person would be preferable and actually more productive. I admit that. But I think first we need to ensure that we're asking ourselves the question more regularly, can this meeting be done by other means? And even in Zoom, we can get to a point where we utilize Zoom even inappropriately. Is there a meeting that could have been done by email rather than taking the time to gather together? So we can have Zoom fatigue. We can have technological fatigue when in fact time could have been better spent if that matter was handled by email. So I believe this is the way of the future, leveraging technology in such a way that we can do more with the resources that we have.
Okay, now that's that I appreciate that response as a person who organizes resources.
There you go.
That's my new vocabulary right there. What we'll do, I'll just ask you one question and then we'll see if we can jump onto some of the comments shortly. I think the one question I did want to ask you relates to where you spent your 35 years at GCAS. There is a sentiment in some elements where, in some areas, that GCAS is essentially an internal audit function as opposed to an external audit function. And you get talk of independence. Is it really independent? Can it really give an independent audit opinion about an institution that is part of the same network that it belongs to? Can you speak to that? Because it also translates into the kind of transparency and integrity of the numbers from people's perceptions.
No, that's a very good question, and it's a question that I've received over the last 35 years in terms of GCAS. Is it internal or is it external? GCAS is internal to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's part of the family. But the manner in which it goes about its work, it's equivalent to that of an external firm. None of the GCAS individuals are employees of the entities that they audit. They're all employees of the highest level of the church, which is the General Conference. Every single 300 members around the world that are part of GCAS are employed by the General Conference. So in so doing, when they end up at a particular location, they go as a separate entity with an independent view of those records and can give an independent opinion. But in our profession, you will well know that independence is determined both in appearance and in fact.
Yeah.
So though we might be in fact independent in our approach and in our thinking, in appearance,
yeah,
that is not so because we are part of the same family. But I would want to believe that our church organizations are well served by having an organization like GCAS. Why? The approach that they take, the independent thought that they bring to it, but nevertheless, the fact that they also understand the mission of the church, understand the accounting processes of the church, and are better suited to be able to provide guidance and a report that would be of best use to church organizations. So you asked a question that has been around for a long time and will continue to be around. But I'm glad I have an opportunity to speak to that here, that even though GCAS is a part, even though GCAS is internal, it in no way diminishes their ability to serve.
No, thank you for that response. Maybe just to also let people know that there are instances, many instances, where other audit firms are also used. I know in the context of ADRA, and certainly where GCAS does not have the capacity to audit all our institutions. Certainly, we do not hesitate to find a credible audit firm to audit some of our entities. So I think that's very important for people to know. Maybe let me just quickly dive into some of these comments. Some are comments, some are questions, but we can quickly see. This comes from someone who I think is actually at GCAS. How can Treasury personnel be strategic partners of the institution? Even corporately, accountants are strategic partners. They scan through the environment so as to help direct the resources in accordance to the mission and strategy of the organization. How can our institution implement this to add value towards meeting the mission of the church? I think it's something you alluded to earlier. Would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add a little bit more in response to that question from John. And it's a change in thinking as well. In Treasury, we have been primarily involved in keeping the records and providing the reports. But there needs to be an element of strategic thinking in terms of what could go wrong and what preparations would I have in place if something like this could go awry. Let's take COVID, for example. Would we have been better off if earlier we were thinking and anticipating a crisis such as this?
Yeah.
And putting in place different things for such type of a crisis. I think that is where we need to now shift from record keeping to risk anticipation and strategies to respond to those things so they're in place before they actually happen.
Uh, it, it, You've actually jumped onto the next question because Ndulamo here is saying, I believe it is the duty of our finance experts in the church to organize money to keep the church relevant. Is the incoming CFO considering plans that organize our money such that in the next global crisis, the church will be seen to support members financially? Okay, there's the second part, but I think the whole idea of anticipating
Correct.
the next crisis as opposed to waiting for the next crisis. But I
Indeed.
think he brings a valid point because there, at least in our part of the world, there is a sentiment that the church collects, but the church does not do much to assist,
Mm.
the members. Of course, here he's specific to say financially. I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
Well, I mean, I know I've been working with my colleagues so far. I have still more to hear from them, and I've been asking them what are the pressing issues of the church at this time, and how we're going to address these issues, and how do we collaborate even more closely together in addressing these issues. But part of that will be having a more anticipatory approach to the things that could happen, and how do we prepare for that. The thought from Elder Foley here in terms of supporting members financially, I don't think that is out of the question. But I would think, though, as we collectively come to the table, understand the events that have happened and are still happening, and look to the fact that things are going to get worse. We know, prophetically speaking, that times are going to get more difficult. How do we prepare ourselves, not only to collect, but also to be seen to care?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's something I want to say to that. Maybe let me just pick some of these. I think the rest are comments here. One thing I'm learning is that we need to use God's resources more efficiently. It's not about personal gain, but God's work.
Amen.
Absolutely. And okay, this is on a lighter note, a little bit of humor. My elder is coming from GCAS, and in no time, GCAS will be auditing him.
Well, unfortunately, that won't be so. Let me clarify that, though.
Okay.
Since at the level of the general conference, we have to
Yeah.
engage an external firm
Okay.
to do the audit of the GC. Well, why is that so? Well, because in this case, the GCAS personnel are GC employees. So it would not be
Wow.
appropriate for them to be auditing their employer. So an
Okay.
external firm is engaged. But I like the tongue-in-cheek joke that he put there, in terms that I'm
Yeah.
now going on the other side and I'm now subject to
You're
my
subject
colleague.
to your colleagues, yes. And in all fairness, it does, at our level, it does actually happen. So it does bring some interesting scenarios every now and then, which I think we also need to look at from
But
the GCAS.
actually, let me quickly say that outside of the appropriateness or the inappropriateness of GCAS auditing the GC, I would not be afraid, and actually would welcome the audits from my colleagues, because I know of the level of their competence. I know the level of their character. I know what they bring to the table. And I would, if there was a way, yes, I would welcome it. But in this case, appropriately so, we use an external firm.
Yes. Well, one thing I did want to speak to you about, it's a little technical, but it speaks to how we manage data, big data, the whole concept of data analytics, which is a big thing in outside the church. We haven't seen enough of it, and that data informing how we carry out our operations. Let me just declare my conflict here. I would love to see you take us in that direction, Elder Douglas, in terms of bringing a more sort of data-driven approach to our decision making. And but what are your thoughts on that?
No, my thoughts are your thoughts as well, and I do believe in data-driven insights. We
Yes.
have a lot of data that is developed over the course of any given year, and over the course of years, that if we mined them appropriately, would be able to give us a greater picture of what is really happening and how we need to position ourselves to even be more effective in what we're doing. So I'm with you, Elder Masuku, in terms of letting data also provide a benefit in terms of how we do our work. Now, we will be challenged and have to find a way of how to globalize that database of data that we can collect, because in several jurisdictions, there are now restrictions on the movement of data. In the European Union, you have the GDPR. In Australia, they have other laws that require data to remain within the confines of their nation state. So, given those realities, we have to be mindful, but nevertheless, we need to pursue how we can extract information, extract insight for the benefit of organizing resources for God's mission.
Elder Douglas, I think we've come to the end of our chat. Just appreciation from Dulamo there, who I think you answered his earlier question that he asked earlier. Thank you for your response. Good to know we're in the direction of driving church business and goals, leveraging our financial expertise. And by the way, we have a lot of great resources in the way of our church members. I found that we benefit so much when we also leverage the human capital that is in our benches to help us to make some of these tough decisions and gain insights. But I know you have an assignment straight after this. Let me take this time to appreciate you coming through, appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, to share your thoughts, to tell us a bit more about where the journey you've traveled, and just give us a bit of a sneak peek to where we are going as a church in this area. And we pray for you and trust that God will, He called you to serve, and certainly we believe that He will equip you for the task. And with that, allow me to wish you a happy Sabbath, as your Sabbath is only just beginning. Thanks again, my elder. And to those who joined us late, allow me to just reiterate an earlier announcement. We don't have an episode in September, but certainly on the 2nd of October, we're discussing tech and treasury. And we would be very grateful if you could join us for that meeting. And with that, allow me to wish you a happy Sabbath. And thanks, Elder Douglas, again. Please just hang on once we are done, and wish everybody on the call, thank you for your contributions. Blessings to you all. Thank you.